I never thought betrayal would come from the person I trusted the most. When I married Linda, I believed in the vows we exchanged. I believed in love, in loyalty, in the quiet comfort of a home built together. But belief is a fragile thing, and mine shattered the day I learned the truth. Linda had been unfaithful. Not just once, not just a single lapse of judgment, but a pattern of deception woven into the very fabric of our marriage. It started with whispers, with unexplained absences, with a distance I couldn't quite define but felt deep in my bones. I wanted to trust her. I needed to trust her. But the pieces didn't fit. I was a fool to ignore the signs. The late-night phone calls she claimed were from work, the sudden interest in her appearance, the way she turned her phone away from me when a message arrived. I made excuses for her. She was stressed. She needed space. She was just going through something. The truth hit me on a Thursday evening. I had come home early from a work trip, hoping to surprise her with dinner. Instead, I was the one surprised. Linda wasn't alone. The man she was with had the audacity to look at me with pity, as if he regretted getting caught. Linda's face turned pale, then red. She stammered something, an explanation, an excuse, maybe even an apology, but I didn't hear her. I was too busy watching the life I had built crumble at my feet. I left that night and never looked back. The divorce was swift and brutal. I gave her nothing but my silence. She took the house, some of our friends, the memories we had built together. But I kept my dignity. And I swore to myself that I would never allow another woman to deceive me again. For a while, I believed I had learned my lesson. Then I met Claire. She was everything Linda wasn't: kind, devoted, the type of woman who made you feel like you were the center of her world. She had a daughter, little Sophie, from a previous relationship, and I admired the way she raised her. A single mother, hardworking, honest. Or so I thought. We married after a year of knowing each other. I ignored the warnings from my friends who said I was rushing. But I was tired of loneliness. Claire filled the void Linda had left behind. For 4 years I built a new life. I raised Sophie as if she were my own, supported Claire through every struggle, gave her my heart without hesitation. And once again I was blind. Claire had secrets, far more than I ever imagined. It started small, just like before. Inconsistencies in her stories, forgotten details that made no sense. She would tell me she was meeting a friend, only for me to learn later that the friend had been out of town. She claimed to have only one child from her past, but then I overheard a conversation that suggested otherwise. Doubt crept in, slow but relentless. Then one evening, while looking for an old insurance document, I found something that made my blood run cold. A birth certificate. Then another. And another. 4 children. 4. Each with a different father. I sat there in stunned silence, my hands trembling as I held the papers. Claire had lied about everything. She had spun a tale of hardship, of a single mother struggling to provide, and I had believed every word. But she had more than just Sophie. She had hidden an entire life from me. And that wasn't the worst of it. A few days later, I found out about the abortion. A decision she had made without my knowledge, without even the decency to tell me. The betrayal burned deeper than anything Linda had ever done. Claire had built our entire marriage on lies. And I had welcomed her into my life, my home, my heart. I had been deceived once. I would not let it happen again. This time I would not walk away quietly. This time there would be consequences. I didn't confront Claire right away. I had learned my lesson from Linda. Anger without a plan was useless. Betrayal wasn't something to be met with mere words. It needed action. Cold, calculated, merciless action. For days I carried the weight of the truth in silence. I watched Claire move through our home, pretending to be the woman I once thought she was. She smiled at me, kissed my cheek, and told me she loved me, all while hiding the reality of her past. And I let her. But my silence wasn't weakness. It was preparation. I gathered evidence, bank statements, text messages, old social media posts she thought were buried. I visited the places she used to live and spoke to people who had known her before she became my wife. I pieced together the life she had so carefully concealed. What I found disgusted me. Claire had spent years deceiving men, weaving herself into their lives before discarding them when it suited her. She had played the role of the struggling single mother, earning sympathy and devotion, only to betray those who cared for her the most. She wasn't just a liar, she was a master manipulator. And now I was just another fool caught in her web. Not for much longer. I began laying the groundwork for my revenge. I didn't just want to leave her, I wanted to dismantle her. Piece by piece, lie by lie, until she had nothing left. First, I secured my finances. Claire had access to my accounts, but I changed that overnight. Slowly, carefully, I moved money out of our joint savings into an account she couldn't touch. I made sure the house, which I had foolishly put in both of our names, would be legally mine by the time I was done. Then I reached out to the other men. Took time, but I found them. The fathers of her other children. They had all been left behind just as I was about to be. Some had moved on, others were still reeling from the damage she had done. But they all had one thing in common: they despised Claire. And they were more than willing to help me destroy her. With their testimonies, I built a case against her. A case strong enough to take Sophie away from her. Because if there was one thing I had learned about Claire, it was that she didn't deserve to be anyone's mother. The final step was the confrontation. It had to be perfect, and it had to be brutal. That night, as Claire sat across from me at the dinner table, oblivious to the storm about to break, I smiled at her. "How was your day?" she asked, taking a sip of wine. I studied her face, searching for any sign of guilt. There was none. She was too good at lying. "Oh, it was productive," I said smoothly. "I learned a lot." She tilted her head, intrigued. "Oh? About what?" I set down my fork and met her gaze. "About you?" For the first time, I saw the flicker of fear in her eyes. I leaned back in my chair, savoring the moment. "Tell me, Claire," I said, my voice calm, almost amused. "How many children do you really have?" Her face went white. Her grip on the wine glass tightened. I smiled. A slow, deliberate smile. "For," I said. "Not one. For." "And you lied about every single one?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again. For the first time since I had met her, Claire was speechless. Good. I wasn't done. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the birth certificates, placing them on the table in front of her. She stared at them, her breathing shallow, her hands trembling. "You didn't think I'd find out?" I continued, my voice soft but deadly. "Did you think I'd never question it? That I'd never look into your past?" "Ryan, No," I cut her off. "No more lies. No more excuses." She swallowed hard, her eyes darting around as if searching for an escape. There was none. "I know about the abortion," I added, my voice turning ice cold. "I know you killed my child while pretending to be my loving wife." Tears welled in her eyes. "I didn't tell you because you knew I'd leave you," I finished for her. "Because you knew the moment I learned the truth, your little game would be over." She covered her mouth with her hands, her shoulders shaking. "I never meant to hurt you," she whispered. I laughed. A cruel, hollow laugh. "Yes, you did," I said. "You've been hurting people your entire life. You used me. You lied to me. You thought I'd be just another fool who would accept it and move on." I stood, towering over her. "But I'm not like the others, Claire." For the first time, real fear flashed in her eyes. I leaned down, bringing my face close to hers. "This time you'll pay for what you've done." Then, without another word, I walked away, leaving her alone at the table, her world crumbling around her. But this was only the beginning. I wasn't finished yet. Not even close. Claire sat frozen, her breathing shallow, her fingers clutching the edge of the table as if it could hold her together. I watched her, waiting for the truth to sink in, waiting for her to realize that she was no longer in control. She had always been the one with the power, the one who deceived, who manipulated, who twisted reality to suit her lies. But now she was the one trapped. Good. I turned and walked toward the door, my heart pounding with cold determination. I didn't look back. I wanted her to sit in that silence, to feel the weight of her own deceit crushing her. "Ryan, wait," her voice trembled, barely above a whisper. I stopped but didn't turn around. "I know you hate me right now," she continued, her voice breaking. "But I never wanted to hurt you. I love you. I swear I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that cut through the air like a knife. "You love me?" I repeated, finally turning to face her. "Is that what you told the other men? The ones you left behind? The ones you lied to?" Tears streamed down her face, but I felt nothing. No sympathy. No regret. Only cold, relentless purpose. "I made mistakes," she admitted. "I was afraid. Afraid you'd leave me if you knew the truth." "That's not fear," I said, my voice like steel. "That's calculation. You didn't tell me because you knew I never would have married you if I had known who you really were." Claire covered her face with her hands, sobbing into her palms. But I didn't care. She had already taken too much from me. And I wasn't done making her pay. The next few days were a blur of preparation. Claire thought I had left the conversation behind, but I hadn't. I was methodically dismantling every lie she had built. First, I met with my lawyer. I laid out everything: the hidden children, the financial deception, the abortion she had concealed from me. He listened in silence, his expression unreadable, but when I finished, he leaned back in his chair and exhaled. "This is bad," he admitted. "For her. I want the divorce finalized as soon as possible," I said firmly. "And I want the house." He nodded. "With the evidence you've provided, the court will be in your favor. But what about Sophie?" I hesitated. Sophie. The only innocent person in all of this. I had helped raise her for 4 years. She called me Dad even though she knew I wasn't. And now, because of Claire, she would lose another father figure. "Can I fight for custody?" I asked. The lawyer sighed. "You're not her biological father, and you never adopted her. It would be nearly impossible." I clenched my jaw. That was what I had feared. But I wasn't going to let Claire keep her daughter in the middle of this mess without a fight. "I wanted in writing that Claire's past and her deception are documented," I said. "In case Sophie ever needs to know the truth." He nodded. "That we can do." The next step was ensuring Claire had no escape. I reached out to the other men she had deceived. One by one I found them. Some were bitter, others had moved on, but all of them carried the same scars. "She made me believe I was the only one," one of them told me. "That she was this struggling mother who just needed someone to care about her." Another man, whose son Claire had abandoned with his family, shook his head. "She never even called after she left. Just disappeared. Like none of it mattered. They all had something in common. They had been used. Just like me." I compiled their stories, their messages, their proof of Claire's trail of destruction. When I was done, I had a collection of testimonies so damning that no judge would ever look at her the same way again. The final stage was the execution. It had to be public. It had to be undeniable. So, I waited until we had dinner with her friends, the ones who thought she was a devoted wife and mother, the ones who had believed her lies. We sat in a private dining room of an upscale restaurant. Claire had no idea what was coming. She smiled, laughed, played the role of the loving wife. I let her. Halfway through the meal, I cleared my throat and raised my glass. "I just want to say a few words," I began, my tone casual. Claire beamed at me, thinking I was about to praise her. She had no idea. "I want to thank Claire for being the woman she is," I continued, watching her closely. "For showing me the importance of honesty." She frowned slightly, sensing something off in my tone. "For teaching me that trust should never be given blindly," I went on. "For reminding me that love without truth is just another lie." The table grew quiet. Claire's hands tightened in her lap. "And most of all," I said, finally looking her in the eyes, "for proving that deception always catches up with you." Silence. Then I pulled out the folder I had brought with me. "I want to share something with you all," I said, setting it on the table and sliding it toward Claire. "Something that might interest you." Claire hesitated. Her fingers trembled as she reached for it. Slowly she opened the folder. Inside were the birth certificates, the testimonies, the proof of her abortion. The color drained from her face. The others leaned in, glancing at the documents. Murmurs filled the room. "What is this?" one of her friends whispered. Claire snapped the folder shut, her breathing ragged. "Ryan," she hissed. "Not here." "Oh, but here is perfect," I said, my voice calm. "These are your friends, aren't they? Don't they deserve to know the real you?" She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You're trying to humiliate me." I leaned back, folding my arms. "No, Claire. I'm showing them who you really are." She turned to the others, desperation in her eyes. "You know me," she pleaded. "You know I'm not like this." One of her friends picked up the documents and skimmed through them, her face paling. "Claire, is this true?" Claire shook her head wildly. "No. He's twisting everything." I simply watched. I had done what I came to do. Claire turned to me, her mask finally shattering. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. I stood, meeting her gaze. "Because you deserved it." Then I walked out. Behind me I heard the whispers growing, the disbelief, the disgust. Claire's carefully crafted world had just collapsed. And I wasn't finished yet. Not even close. Claire didn't come home that night. I sat in the quiet of our house. No, my house, sipping a glass of whiskey, staring at the untouched dinner she had left on the counter before we went to the restaurant. She must have thought we'd come back together, that I'd smile at her, kiss her, tell her everything would be okay. But nothing was okay. And it never would be again. I had spent weeks, months even, carefully crafting the moment that had shattered her. And now she had to sit in the ruins of her own deceit. Good. I finally went to bed at 2 a.m. and when I woke up, the house was still empty. No messages. No calls. Nothing. But Claire wasn't the kind of woman who disappeared quietly. No, she was a survivor. A manipulator. A liar. And I knew she wasn't done trying to save herself. I checked my phone. Sure enough, there it was. A long, desperate message. Claire, Ryan, please. I don't know what to say. I messed up, I lied, but I never wanted to hurt you. I love you. I always have. Please just talk to me. Please. I stared at the message for a long time before deleting it. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of a reply. I had spent years of my life listening to Claire's words, believing them, letting them shape my reality. But now I knew better. Words were nothing. Actions were everything. And my actions weren't finished yet. That afternoon, I made my way to Sophie's school. Claire might have been my enemy now, but Sophie was different. She was an innocent caught in a war she didn't even know was happening. She deserved better than the life her mother had built for her. When she saw me waiting by the car, her eyes lit up. Dad, she called out, running over. I smiled, but my heart was heavy. She had no idea what was coming. We drove to her favorite diner, the one where we used to go on weekends when Claire was busy. I let her order a milkshake and extra fries, even though Claire would have protested. She had no right to control this moment. Everything okay? Sophie asked, sipping her shake. Mom's been acting weird. I took a deep breath. Sophie, there's something I need to tell you. Her face fell. Is this about you and Mom? I nodded. Yeah, kiddo. It is. She looked down at her fries, pushing them around on the plate. I kind of figured. I frowned. You did? She shrugged. Mom's been different. And I've heard her on the phone at night, crying. I knew something was wrong, but she wouldn't tell me. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. I'm sorry you had to hear that. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then finally she asked, Are you leaving? I shook my head. No, Sophie. I'm not leaving you. But things between me and your mom, they can't be fixed. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them away. So what happens now? I swallowed hard. That's something we have to figure out together. She nodded slowly, then surprised me by reaching across the table and squeezing my hand. I don't want to lose you, she whispered. You won't, I promised. But even as I said the words, I wasn't sure how I was going to keep that promise. Claire would fight me for Sophie. And I wasn't about to let her win. When we got home, Claire's car was in the driveway. Showtime. Sophie ran inside first, but I took my time. I wasn't in a rush to face whatever desperate game Claire had planned next. When I stepped into the house, she was waiting in the living room. Her face was pale, her eyes puffy from crying, but there was something else beneath the misery. Something sharp. She was ready for a fight. We need to talk, she said. I walked past her, setting my keys on the counter. There's nothing left to say. She stepped forward, blocking my path. The hell there isn't, she snapped, her voice raw. You humiliated me, Ryan. In front of everyone. Do you have any idea what you've done? I laughed, shaking my head. You're unbelievable. I exposed the truth, Claire. That's all I did. She clenched her jaw. You didn't just expose me. You destroyed me. Good, I said coldly. She recoiled like I had slapped her. You really hate me that much? I took a slow step toward her, forcing her to meet my gaze. You lied to me from the moment we met. You let me believe I was building a future with you when I didn't even know who you really were. You let me love you while keeping secrets that no real wife would keep. Tears streamed down her face, but I felt nothing. You killed my child, I continued, my voice barely above a whisper. And you didn't even tell me? She opened her mouth, but I didn't let her speak. No more excuses, Claire. No more lies. This is over. She wiped her tears, her breath shaky. You think you're going to win, don't you? She whispered. That you're going to walk away from this and be the hero? I narrowed my eyes. I don't care about being a hero. I care about justice. She let out a bitter laugh. Justice? Is that what you call this? I call it consequences, I said. Her face twisted with anger. You want consequences? Fine. Let's talk consequences. She grabbed her phone and pulled up a message. Then she turned the screen toward me. It was an email. From her lawyer. My stomach turned. I filed for full custody of Sophie, she said, her voice shaking but filled with determination. You want to take everything from me? Let's see how you feel when I take something from you. I stared at her, my jaw tightening. She wanted war? Fine. She would get it. And this time I wouldn't hold back. Claire thought she could beat me. She thought filing for full custody of Sophie would break me, that I'd back down, that I'd beg her to reconsider. She had no idea who she was dealing with. I didn't react the way she wanted. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I didn't even flinch. I just stared at her, silent, unreadable. And then I smiled. It was the first time I had ever seen true fear in Claire's eyes. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life," I said calmly. Her grip tightened on her phone, her confidence wavering. "I'm her mother," she said as if that alone would save her. "The court always favors the mother." "Not when the mother is a pathological liar," I countered. "Not when the mother has a history of deception, abandonment, and fraud." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't speak. "You didn't think I'd prepare for this?" I asked, shaking my head. "I've spent weeks gathering evidence. Every lie, every scheme, every man you've used and discarded. I have statements from them, Claire. They all told me their stories, and do you know what they all have in common?" She swallowed hard. "Ryan?" "They all say the same thing," I continued, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "That you don't care about anyone but yourself." Her breath hitched. "And now," I added, "I have the proof to make sure you never get custody of Sophie." Her mask cracked. "You wouldn't?" I stepped closer. "Watch me." She let out a shaky breath, her bravado crumbling. I can explain?" "No," I cut her off. "You don't get to explain. You don't get to manipulate your way out of this. You lied to me for years. You let me believe I was raising a daughter with a woman I could trust. But trust? That's long gone, Claire." She blinked rapidly, trying to fight back tears. "Ryan, please. I love you. I made mistakes, but I never wanted to hurt you." I let out a cold laugh. "You didn't just hurt me, Claire. You ruined everything." For a moment she didn't speak. Then her expression shifted, anger replacing desperation. "Fine," she snapped. "If you want a fight, you'll get one. But don't think for a second that I'll let you take Sophie from me." She turned on her heel and stormed upstairs, slamming the bedroom door behind her. I stood there, breathing steadily, letting my anger simmer beneath the surface. Claire was about to learn what real consequences felt like. The next morning I met with my lawyer. "I need to go after full custody," I said, my voice firm. "No shared parenting. No compromise." He nodded, already expecting this. "With the evidence we have, we can argue that Claire is an unfit parent. But I won't lie to you, family courts still lean in favor of the mother, unless we prove Sophie's well-being is at risk." I clenched my jaw. "Then we prove it?" He slid a folder toward me. "I've already started compiling testimonies from the men Claire deceived. Some of them are willing to provide official statements about her pattern of abandonment. But we need more." I opened the folder. Names, dates, locations, all meticulously recorded. Then something caught my eye. A bank statement. "This," I trailed off, scanning the numbers. "Large, frequent withdrawals. Money transferred to accounts I didn't recognize." "What is this?" I asked. My lawyer leaned back. "Claire's financial records. I had an investigator look into her spending. It turns out she's been funneling money into a private account for months." I felt my blood turn cold. "She was planning to leave me?" "Looks that way," he confirmed. "And she was planning to take everything she could with her." I exhaled slowly. This wasn't just about Sophie anymore. This was about Claire trying to escape with the upper hand. But now she had no way out. That evening, I waited for Claire to come home. She had been out all day, likely meeting with her lawyer, strategizing. But there was nothing she could do to prepare for what was coming next. When she walked in, she froze at the sight of me sitting at the dining table, a stack of documents in front of me. "We need to talk," I said smoothly. She hesitated. "Ryan, I'm tired. Can we do this later?" "No," I said. "We do this now." Her lips pressed into a thin line, but she sat across from me. "What is it?" I slid the bank statements toward her. She went pale. "Where did you get these?" I smiled. "You really thought I wouldn't find out?" She opened her mouth, but I held up a hand. "I know you were planning to leave," I said. "I know you were funneling money away. I know you thought you could take everything and walk away without consequences." Her face crumpled. "Ryan, save it." My voice was ice. "I already spoke to my lawyer. And let me tell you how this is going to go." She gripped the table, her hands shaking. "You will drop your custody claim," I continued. "You will agree to my terms in the divorce. You will walk away with nothing except supervised visitation rights for Sophie." Her breath hitched. "You can't do that." "Oh, but I can," I said, leaning forward. "Because if you fight me, Claire, I will take everything. I will expose you in court. I will bring every man you've lied to, every record of your deception, every single piece of evidence that proves you are unfit to raise Sophie." Tears welled in her eyes. "You don't have to do this." I tilted my head. "Don't I?" She swallowed hard. I leaned back. "The choice is yours, Claire. Make the smart one." Silence stretched between us. Then finally she looked away. Fine, she whispered. Victory tasted sweeter than I expected. I stood, collecting the documents. I'll have my lawyer finalize the terms. I expect you to sign them without issue. She didn't respond. She just sat there, staring at the table as if her entire world had collapsed. And maybe it had. I didn't care. Claire had built a life of lies. And now she had nothing. I turned and walked away, feeling lighter than I had in years. But this wasn't over yet. Not until Sophie was safe. Not until Claire was gone. For good. Claire was losing. For the first time in her life, she had no escape, no way to manipulate the situation in her favor. She was cornered and she knew it. Over the next few days she barely spoke to me. She moved through the house like a ghost, her face pale, her eyes hollow. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I'd remember the lies. The betrayal. The way she had built our marriage on deception, using me like she had used every other man before me. And whatever pity I might have felt turned to ice. She had made her choices. Now she had to live with them. My lawyer moved quickly, finalizing the divorce papers and the custody agreement. As promised, Claire would get nothing, not a cent from our accounts, not a single asset. The only thing she'd walk away with was supervised visitation rights for Sophie. It was more than she deserved. I left the papers on the kitchen counter for her to sign. She ignored them for 3 days. On the 4th, I came home to find her sitting at the table, staring at the documents with an empty expression. Sign them, I said simply. She didn't look at me. Is this really what you want? I crossed my arms. It's what you deserve. Her hands clenched into fists. You think this makes you better than me? She whispered. Destroying me like this? I let out a cold laugh. You destroyed yourself, Claire. I just made sure you couldn't lie your way out of it this time. She exhaled shakily, then with trembling fingers picked up the pen. I watched as she scrawled her signature on each page. When she was done, she set the pen down and pushed the papers toward me. There, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Happy now? I took the papers and tucked them into my briefcase. Relieved? She wiped at her eyes, but I saw no real tears. Claire had spent her entire life pretending to be something she wasn't. This was no different. I turned to leave the room, but her next words stopped me in my tracks. Ryan, she said quietly, do you ever think about what could have been? I looked over my shoulder. No. Her face crumpled. Not even for a second? I exhaled. Claire, the woman I thought I married, never existed. I don't waste time mourning something that was never real. She bit her lip, nodding slowly. I guess I deserve that. I didn't answer. I just walked away. Because she did. The day Claire moved out, I took Sophie out for ice cream. It was a small thing, but I wanted her to have something good to hold on to. She sat across from me, her spoon stirring the melted remains of her chocolate sundae. Is Mom going to be okay? I hesitated. I don't know. She looked up at me. Are we going to be okay? I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. We will be, kiddo. Her small fingers tightened around mine. Promise? I nodded. Promise? It was the only promise I had left to keep. Claire was gone by the time we got home. She had left no note, no goodbye. Just an empty space where her things used to be. I stood in the doorway of what had once been our bedroom, looking at the hollow remains of a life that had never really belonged to me. And for the first time since it all began, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. It was over. Really, truly over. Claire was out of my life. And I was finally free. For the first time in years, the house was quiet. Not the heavy, suffocating silence that had come with doubt and betrayal, but something else. Something lighter. Claire was gone. And with her, the endless lies, the manipulation, the weight of pretending I had something real. Sophie and I adjusted quickly. She was resilient, stronger than I had realized. I did my best to keep her life as normal as possible, to shield her from the full ugliness of what had happened. She never asked too many questions about Claire's departure. Maybe she knew enough to fill in the gaps. Maybe she just didn't want to know. I didn't push. Some wounds were better left untouched. Claire's departure should have been the end. But it wasn't. Because a woman like Claire doesn't disappear quietly. It started with the messages. At first they were short. Simple. I miss you. I'm sorry. Please talk to me. I ignored them. Then came the voicemails. She cried. She pleaded. She told me she was lost without me. That she had been broken long before we met, and that I had been the only good thing in her life. I deleted every single one. Then the messages turned angry. You ruined my life. You turned Sophie against me. You're not as innocent as you think, Ryan. And finally, the threats. If I can't have Sophie, neither can you. That one made my blood run cold. I knew Claire. I knew she was desperate, reckless, dangerous when cornered. And right now, she had nothing left to lose. I needed to act before she did. My lawyer moved fast. We filed for a restraining order, citing Claire's threats and unstable behavior. Given everything I had on her, the judge didn't hesitate. She was officially barred from contacting me or Sophie. She was out of our lives. For good. Or so I thought. One night, I woke to the sound of shattering glass. Adrenaline hit me like a freight train. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept under my bed and moved quickly, quietly, my pulse pounding. As I stepped into the hallway, I saw the source of the noise. A rock. It had been thrown through the living room window. And outside, under the dim glow of the street lights, stood Claire. She was barefoot, her hair wild, her face streaked with tears. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Then she whispered, "You took everything from me." I gripped the bat tighter. "Leave, Claire." She shook her head. "You think this is justice? You think this is fair? You did this to yourself," I said coldly. "Now go before I call the police." She let out a bitter laugh. "You already did, didn't you?" The sound of sirens filled the air. Claire's expression twisted, a mix of fury and devastation. "This isn't over," she hissed. I didn't respond. I just watched as the police pulled up, as they cuffed her, as they took her away. And as she disappeared into the night, screaming my name, I knew one thing for certain. It was over. Really, truly over. The morning after Claire was arrested, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my coffee. It should have felt like a victory. The woman who had deceived me, used me, threatened me, she was finally out of my life. But all I felt was exhaustion. Sophie came downstairs, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. She froze when she saw the boarded-up window. "Did something happen?" she asked. I forced a smile. "Just a little accident. Nothing to worry about." She studied me for a moment, then nodded. Maybe she believed me. Maybe she just didn't want to ask. Either way, I was grateful. She deserved peace. That afternoon, I met with my lawyer one last time. Claire's bail was denied, he told me. With the restraining order violation, her threats, and the evidence we already have, she won't be getting out anytime soon. I exhaled, tension easing from my shoulders. "And Sophie?" "She's safe," he assured me. "Your custody arrangement is ironclad. Claire has no legal ground to challenge it now." Finally. It was really over. Weeks passed. Then months. Sophie and I built something new. Something real. We made new traditions. Movie nights. Weekend road trips. Lazy Sunday mornings filled with pancakes and laughter. For the first time in a long time, life felt normal. Claire tried reaching out from prison. Letters I never read, calls I never answered. I refused to let her back in. She was a ghost now. A relic of a past I had survived. And that was all she would ever be. One evening, as Sophie and I sat on the back porch watching the sunset, she turned to me. "Are you happy, Dad?" I looked at her, at the little girl I had fought so hard to protect, and smiled. "I am now," I said. And for the first time in years, it was the truth. Months passed, and Claire faded into the background of my life like a bad dream I refused to remember. Sophie and I settled into our new reality. The house was no longer filled with tension, no longer a battlefield of silent arguments and hidden truths. It was just a home now, ours. I rebuilt everything Claire had tried to destroy. My finances, my reputation, my peace. But some wounds never fully heal. Some scars stay no matter how much time passes. One afternoon, I received an unexpected letter. The return address was from a prison facility. Claire. I nearly tossed it into the trash without opening it. But something stopped me. Curiosity? Pity? Closure? I wasn't sure. Hands steady, I tore the envelope open and pulled out the letter. "Ryan, I know you'll probably throw this away. Maybe you won't even read it. But I have to try. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I ruined everything. I see that now. I've spent the past few months in here thinking about everything I did to you. To Sophie. To all the men I hurt. And I hate the person I was. I hate what I did. I don't blame you for hating me. I don't blame you for destroying me. But there's one thing I need you to know. I really did love you, Ryan. Maybe that doesn't mean anything now. Maybe it never did. But I need you to believe that at least that part was real. Take care of Sophie. Be the father she deserves. Goodbye, Claire." I read it twice. Then I folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer. I didn't need to respond. Some things didn't deserve answers. Some things were better left buried. That night, as I tucked Sophie into bed, she looked up at me. "Do you think Mom will ever come back?" she asked softly. I hesitated, brushing her hair back. I don't know, I admitted. But no matter what happens, you'll always have me. She smiled sleepily. That's enough. And for the first time I truly believed it. A year passed. Claire was nothing more than a distant shadow, a name I barely thought about anymore. Life moved forward and I let it. Sophie flourished. She laughed more, smiled more. She wasn't weighed down by the secrets her mother had carried. And neither was I. For the first time in years I was free. One evening, as we sat on the back porch watching the sunset, Sophie turned to me. Do you ever miss her? She asked. I took a slow breath, considering my answer. I miss the person I thought she was, I admitted. But that person never really existed. Sophie nodded, as if she understood more than a child should. Are you happy now? She asked. I looked at her. My daughter, my reason for fighting, my proof that life could rebuild itself after destruction. I smiled. Yes, I said. I am. And for the first time in my life I knew it was true.